but our culture at large has not seen healthy, whole men. They haven't seen mature masculinity. And we have a culture of a lot of adult boys.
Rusty Mackie, welcome.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Did you ever think you and I would be sitting here doing this together?
I did not, but I'm so excited that we are.
Okay, let me give our listeners some context. So you and I go way back, Bible college, seminary, a lot of late night talks with our spouses. The four of us are really good friends. Since then, you have gone on to plant a successful church and then basically walk away from the whole thing and become a monk, kind of.
Modern monk.
Modern day monk. So you're a spiritual director, a somatic coach. You've written 2 books. You are the founder of Steadfast Ministries. Before we get into your latest project, which is ManSchool, and it's the focus of this episode, tell me a little bit about your work at Steadfast Ministries.
Yeah, so Steadfast Ministries, I primarily work with church leaders around the country, which is a deep joy for me. So most of that work is done over Zoom, one-on-one work. I also travel to churches and will work with teams, and it's essentially helping them grow in getting so close to Jesus in their personal life that they can hear his voice clearly, so they get clarity on what God's calling them to do in their ministry, but then also they're so close to him that they have the confidence to actually step into doing it. So one of my taglines there is grounded in Christ. And so I'm very convinced that that is what leaders need, not necessarily strategies, although those are good, not necessarily deepening in their doctrine, although that is good. Most leaders get into trouble in that they just get a little too far from Jesus as they are ministering to others on behalf of Jesus.
100%. Yeah. I resonate with that. You also have a role at Crosspoint Church, is that right?
I do. Crosspoint in Altamont Springs, Florida, right down the road. I am the men's director part-time there, and so I get the joy of just meeting with men in my church and walking with them. And then I also help out with preaching from time to time.
Which, that kind of takes us into ManSchool. So for the past 6 years, you've been studying male masculinity in order to launch this 5-year curriculum for dads and sons.
I was actually not, like many things in my life, I kind of get fixated on a thing, and then I start to sense God calling me to do a thing, and then I think I don't actually want to do that thing, and then I push back until I can't anymore. So I've been deep diving into male masculinity in terms of thinking of my own sons growing up and helping them transition from boyhood into manhood. And then as I began to look into other curriculums that are out there, it's kind of like the Goldilocks effect of like, oh, that one's like too small and that one's like too big, and like, oh, I really don't want to create one of these, and I just couldn't drop it. And so over time, just since God inviting me into this space of creating a 5-year curriculum called ManSchool that helps dads mentor their sons into men.
So before we dive into that exactly, I kind of wanted to talk about masculinity first. Just what started you on that journey of curiosity? Was it just fatherhood in your sons? Was there any other element?
Yes, there were some other elements. So definitely the dynamic of how do I do this with my son, which naturally for myself and my generation comes from no one did this with me.
Exactly.
No one showed me how to be a man. So how do I show my son how to be a man? Also with Steadfast Ministries, I just found around the time that all this was congealing together that the clients I was working with, specifically the male pastors, a lot of them were going through kind of this midlife transition of like first half of life and the second half of life. So I was like, that's interesting. Also noticing a lot of father wounds.
Yes.
And I thought, that's interesting. And a little bit of context is I've actually been anti-men's ministry for a lot of my life. When we planted our church, we had men's and women's ministry, and I was solely responsible for blowing it all up. I was like, we're stopping this. we're not going to do this anymore, and we're going to actually have discipleship spaces and include both men and women, because I also believe that we have so much to learn from one another. So all of that to say, it was pretty comical. It is comical that I am now stepping into this space with ManSchool. Even the dynamic of being asked to be part-time as the men's director, I told my pastor, if you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have laughed at you and said no. But because God had taken me on a journey of seeing, maybe we can do men's ministry in a way that's a little different, as opposed to just kind of like the rah-rah, manhood kind of stuff that gets tossed out there. So recognizing there's some good stuff here when we think about male spirituality, understanding the challenges and the strengths and pressing into those.
It's funny, my producer actually called me last night.
Yeah.
We were talking through some things, and he was talking about this episode briefly, and he said, do you as a woman find this subject interesting, masculinity?
Sure. Yeah.
And I said, absolutely. In fact, I would say lately in my own life, I've become fascinated with masculinity more than femininity, because I think as I go to counseling and engage my own story, I've found that a lot of my current behaviors, and I would say not just behaviors, but patterns, stem from unmet desires in my relationship with my dad, who is a wonderful dad, but human, you know what I mean? And I like that you just said some of your journey came out of like, no one taught me how to do this. Have you seen on Netflix the documentary, The Liver King?
No.
You should watch it.
Okay. Should we pause right now and watch it? We'll be back.
It's wild. It's this influencer back in the day who's like the alpha male, super jacked. He became famous for eating raw meat. He's like, he taught this ancestral way of living, tear open the animal, eat the liver,
that's
really
disgusting.
And he was always hounded for, this guy's got to be on steroids because of how big he is. No, I'm ancestral. Of course, we find out he is, for like doing like $11,000 worth of steroids a month.
Wow.
And this is the untold story because he fell from fame, right? So this is his story of how he got here. And there's a scene in it where he delves into his childhood being this scrawny little boy that nobody stood up for. People picked on him. He never felt like enough. And you see this huge, almost caricature of a guy because he's so muscle bound in his chair, and he starts to cry. And he said this thing that was just like a raw cry of his heart. He goes, why didn't I have a dad? And he's like, why didn't I have anybody to stand up for me? And he said as a boy, he was so drawn to Rambo and all that picture of manhood because he had a dad longing. And I think all of us, whether we're women or men, whether we have the presence of a flawed human dad or the absence of a dad altogether, that masculinity impacts us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk about father wounds. We can talk about the father ache or the father longing. Dave Patty, in his book, Father God, talks about the father voids that we have. So it's not necessarily the wounds that our fathers impacted upon us, but it's just the absence of them showing up. So, I mean, we can talk about that in a lot of ways. And yet, like you said, I just love this dynamic of like, because my dad was human. And so, especially in a therapeutic culture, we can be like, well, all of my problems are because of my parents. And that is a immature way to think about our wounds and did our parents contribute? Of course they did, because they were our first community. They shaped our first community and how we now interact in relationships. So there's a lot of influence there, for sure, a lot of power there. But they're also people, and they're imperfect. And so hopefully, as we go on these journeys of understanding where our first families hurt us, we can also grow in compassion towards them, which for me, being a dad has helped me in so many ways in that, because it's like, well, I just did that thing to my son that my dad did to me. And I didn't do it on purpose, but I did. And, oh, goodness, here we are.
It's humbling.
It's very humbling to be a parent.
What would you say culture at large, how do they view manhood today, if you had to kind of give a synopsis?
Yeah, That is, yeah. I think culture at large right now, when they think about masculinity and the problems with masculinity, I think they would say masculinity is the problem. And so there's this dynamic of, well, actually masculinity is the problem and we just need to fix that. So kind of the toxic Rambo masculinity gets lumped into the idea of masculinity. And I would say, well, actually, immature masculinity is a problem. But our culture at large has not seen healthy, whole men. They haven't seen mature masculinity. So within that, that then practically turns into a lot of men that I talk with. It's like, well, culture, or even the ladies in their lives, they want them to be more emotional. They want them to be more tapped into some of the more, what would be characterized as feminine qualities, right? And, oh, I'm not feminine enough. But then when they do that, they're like, well, I also want you to be strong. I also want you to like stand up and protect me. Like, so there seems to be this tension between kind of a hyper toxic masculinity. And then as men are trying to find their way, sometimes they can kind of go a little bit more into this kind of passivity, a passive masculinity. And it's, it's hard to be a human. I tell my kids that all the time. So I don't want to sit here and say, like, it's hard to be a man these days. It's hard to be a woman these days, too. Like, there's all kinds of cultural things that makes it hard to be a woman. However, it is challenging for men to know what it means to be a man, because they're kind of being told two different extremes. And depending on who you're interacting with, it's like, well, where do you want me on this spectrum?
Yeah, well, what do you say to that? Because I feel that.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what is a man to do? Is he to just try to be both?
I say we need healthy, whole men.
How do you become a healthy, whole man?
Yeah. So we first have to define it, which has its own challenges, right? The challenges there is the moment you start to define something, you also tend to simplify the thing. So I think that's one of the reasons why we go to all these extremes. Another challenge with defining is we start to compare. So a lot of the definitions around manhood become, well, this is what a man is and this is what a woman is, which then means this is what a woman is not and this is what a man is not. You get into weird stuff there, right? So you get into stuff like, well, men do hard things. And it's like, okay, fair. Well, let's think about women for a moment. One of the things that women can uniquely do is give birth to children.
A little bit hard.
That's a pretty hard thing. So women do hard things too, right? Or women are nurturers. Okay, fair. Well, men should be nurturers to their children as well, right? So we get into some weird things when we start comparing. So we need to define in such a way where we're not going to extremes, but we're holding the whole of it. We also need to define in such a way where we're not just comparing this is what men are and men are not and women are not. But then also back to that idea of like, no one showed men how to be men in this generation.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I have pressed into this ManSchool idea, is because, my goodness, we need to get back to an old way. This is not a new thing. We are the first culture. We are the first culture in human history to not have rite of passage ceremonies where adults are showing boys how to be men.
Wow.
So historically, throughout our world, and even culturally still today in places that are not influenced by Western civilization, you still have men of a tribe call to a boy and take him out of the space of the other children and the other women, take him into a male-specific space and to start his initiation into manhood.
Wow.
So that has happened, that is happening in the world. It does not happen here.
Yeah.
So the result is there's a void, there's a father void. And because of that, we now have peers who are initiating peers. So this is where you get gangs. This is where you get fraternity, aggression, and violence.
Yes.
This is where you get just kind of the culture of immaturity, facilitating more immaturity. Even as adults, I mean, think about how often our generation will say, like, oh, I wish I had an older man. I wish I had an older woman in my life. We've become a very peer-oriented culture to where peers are showing peers how to live. So part of how we get back to helping men know how to be men is we need to re-flip the script to say we need adults. We need mature men who are, and by that, don't hear perfect, but we need mature and maturing men showing boys how to grow into maturity. That's what's needed.
So we're going to get to the definition, I believe, of masculinity soon, because you really cover that in ManSchool with like 5 classic archetypes. But before we go there, when you said this whole rite of passage, my question is, what is the difference between a boy and a man?
Yeah, again, I think you have, the moment you start trying to define that, you have to define manhood. So those same reasons why it's hard to define what a man is are present there. But with that caveat in place, if I were to take a stab at it, I would say that boys in general have this self-bent. There's a bent in on the self. Carl Jung, way back in the day, he would talk about the hero archetype. So boys kind of live with this hero archetype of I want to achieve, I want to perform, I want to win so that I can be seen. So there needs to be a transition from that desire that's kind of bent in on the self, that the world is here for me and to see me and to praise me and to acknowledge me. There needs to be a transition from that hero archetype to more of what Henry Nouwen would call like the wounded healer. So even within that, you recognize some suffering has to take place within that process, right? But the wounded healer is able to have more of a sense of, okay, this is who I am in Jesus. And so then I can look outside of myself. I can look towards others. So if we were to summarize it, a boy consumes, whereas a man cultivates.
I got chill bumps.
Yeah, so that takes you back to Adam, right? What Adam should have done. He's put in a garden to cultivate, to partner with God. What do? They consume the fruit, right? And it leads them down this whole, parade of shame that we all followed them in. In addition to that, if you just want to put into the simplest terms, it's like, what's the difference? Well, it's a movement from immaturity to maturity. What's the most absolute quintessential picture of a mature man is Jesus, So
yes,
we help our boys and ourselves grow more towards Christ-likeness.
Yes. Okay. Now, you mentioned Carl Jung.
Yeah.
I know he was influential as you thought about male archetypes and you began to develop ManSchool. Tell me about ManSchool. Tell me about those archetypes.
Yeah. So again, it's challenging and I still struggle with how do you define a man? I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like, you know it when you see it, but it's hard sometimes to put your finger on it. The moment you start trying to define it, similar to what we mentioned earlier, it's like men do hard things. Well, women do too,
Right.
You can really look at a lot of these characteristics and realize, okay, some of the dynamics of what we think of as a man or a woman, there's a lot of crossover, right? But in terms of thinking about it, I do find it helpful to go back to the archetypes of manhood. So Carl Jung was the first one to put this into words. He wasn't the first one to it wasn't his original idea. He didn't come up with it. He looked at ancient myths. He looked at ancient stories. He looked at the way ancient people would basically imagine manhood. And from there, he began to recognize, they have certain patterns or types of men in mind. So they would talk about the lover, the warrior, the king, and the sage. Those are Carl Jung's archetypes. Within that, he very much viewed it that every man has those archetypes, those types in his heart, those aspects of manhood in his heart. And what needs to happen is you need other men to help you initiate, to start the journey of maturation, and then you need to build them up together at the same time so that you can be a whole man, right? So for example, warrior energy, which is I'm gonna fight to protect, I'm gonna be proactive, I'm gonna be strategic in my thing. I'm not gonna get so weighed down by my thoughts and my emotions that I can't act.
Yeah.
That kind of energy by itself turns to savagery.
Ripping a liver out of an animal.
Ripping a liver out of an animal and eating it. So you need the lover energy to balance it, right? You need to be able to get more in touch with your sensuality, your sense of awe and wonder when you look at, so not just sexuality, but also like to be able to look at a sunset and be brought to tears. Like that's part of what it means to be a man who has an awakened lover heart, right? So those balance one another out. So for young, all these grow in concert together. Now, is that a perfect way to talk about masculinity? I don't think so, but I think it's the best we got. I think it's helpful. So with ManSchool is 5 years, and every year a dad is walking his son through initiating and blessing one of these aspects of his masculinity. I've kept some of the old, I've tossed in some new, just for fun. So we look at men are warriors, and then I have basically a mantra for each one that is really going back to that idea of what does it look like to move from immaturity to maturity in this area. So men are warriors who fight to bless and not curse. So you can even hear the difference between boyhood and manhood there, right? Like a boy just has all this aggression and he just wants to fight.
Yes.
He's got testosterone flooding through his body and he's just like, I want to be aggressive. And it's like, yeah, you're kind of cursing the people around you.
And probably self-centered too, to defend myself.
Yes, this is not fair, right? I mean, how often do we hear that from not just our boys, but our children? So yes, warrior fights to bless, not curse. Year 2 is men are lovers who surrender to vulnerability, not fear. Year 3 is men are workers. So that's a new archetype that I've tossed in the mix there. Men are workers who strive to serve, not succeed. Right? So you can even hear like the life of Jesus there, the sacrificial service. You can hear the difference between boyhood and manhood.
Yes.
Boys have that hero archetype of, I want to perform so that you can see me, right? Men learn how to put that off. And they learn how to put on a service that says, no, I can serve in the shadows. I can strive to do good work that builds up those around me, that cultivates a garden, right? Year 4, men are monks who retreat to engage, not escape. So engaging with God, with yourself, so that you can return into the world as a deeply engaged man. Year 5, then, men are sages who listen to wisdom and not folly. A lot of Proverbs underneath that one.
I kind of want to unpack those a little more because they're so rich. We've talked a bit about the warrior part.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little more about the lover ones. Say the statement again. Vulnerability, not fear, but how does it go?
Men are lovers who surrender to vulnerability, not to fear.
Explain.
So again, the warrior and the lover really balance one another. So for a warrior, there is a sense of vulnerability there. You're fighting, and there's a sense of, I could be physically hurt in this situation, if we're thinking of like true fighting, right? But even fighting for a cause of like, I could get wounded in this process. With the lover aspect of our hearts, we really want to move into this idea of a deepening and a broadening sensuality. This is not an idea that's original to me. Sam Jolman, in his new book that is excellent, everyone should read it, The Sex Talk You Never Got. He makes this argument that God has created us as men to view the world through this bigger lens of sensuality. Again, that we can see beauty and be moved by it. That we can look at a piece of art and be moved. That we can go out into nature and just say, oh my gosh, this moves me, right? And within that broader context of sensuality is where our sexuality has to live. The problem is we live in such a sexualized culture that sexuality is everything.
Yeah.
And it's too much weight. It's too much weight on the shoulders of our sexuality. So when it comes to this idea of sensuality, we just recognize there is a vulnerability in that. There's a vulnerability in being moved. There's a vulnerability in feeling emotion. There's a vulnerability in being able to put ourselves out there relationally. So it's really more of a relational vulnerability to God, to creation, to others. There's a vulnerability of, I'm going to put myself out there and you could hurt me.
Yes.
But we have to surrender to that vulnerability rather than surrendering to fear, which leads to anxiety, self-protection strategies.
Shutting all
that down. Yes. And the problem is because we haven't initiated, blessed, discipled men to have a lover heart, we have then said, well, the only place for sensuality is in our sex lives. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the sexuality piece has gotten so blown out of proportion.
Yeah, that makes sense, Rusty.
Yeah.
It's like if all you have is this warrior,
Yes.
then you're too scared to be sensitive or to even just I'm thinking about like these men who I can't imagine they wouldn't want to talk about the beauty of a sunset because they would think that's effeminate.
Exactly.
So then it just comes out in raw sex. And our lead pastor here at Grace, something he teaches, which I think is really beautiful and in line with this, is that a lot of the reason men go to porn is because they have a longing for beauty and a longing for connection, but it gets distorted. And the way to free a man from porn is not just to say, stop it, it's to meet that real need, fall in love with the right picture, which is similar to what you're saying.
Just fall in love with the right picture. I can't remember the old author who said
Is it Augustine?
I was not Augustine. I can't remember. But every time someone rings the brothel bell, they're really calling for Christ.
Yes.
Russell Moore also has a line about this in his Tempted and Tried book where he talks about that, every time a man looks at pornography, it's because he's really longing for the deeper mystery of union with Christ. So, again, I've been doing a deep dive in Song of Songs, kind of in line with all of this.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, it's kind of weird for us as men to think about Jesus as our lover.
Right. I've never thought about that.
It's such a strange thing. It's so hard, but that is the reality that makes the universe make sense. And so, yes, absolutely. When we can't see, there's this, even a vulnerability, this is kind of getting into the monk aspect as well. There's a vulnerability in our intimacy with Jesus. And can I actually bring my true self, not just my strong self, but can I bring the weak parts of myself, the vulnerable parts of myself to Jesus? That's when I come alive as a man. That's when this lover heart in me starts to become awakened. And so, yes, we can experience our lover heart in the sensuality of our world, but it's a signpost that's pointing us to the deeper longing for union with Jesus.
Interesting. Just before we move on, I want to touch a little more on worker. Say that one again.
Yeah. So men are workers who strive. So there is striving involved. They strive to serve, not succeed.
I would say 90, maybe 99% of the men I know who are my age in their 30s, 40s, 50s, work to succeed because their biggest fear is failure and they have to prove themselves perpetually till the day they die.
Yes, it's the rat race.
That would actually be a form of boyhood, you're saying.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. We actually live in a culture with a lot of adult boys.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. Again, because
some
of it's our fault, some of it's that we haven't been trained.
I do that
There's
too.
all kinds of things.
I work to succeed more than I do to serve. So I'm putting myself in that category. But
yeah, you look culturally, so even going back to the idea of boyhood versus manhood, consuming versus cultivation, I think that one really shines within the worker, right? What is our culture all about? It's all about consumption. And our American culture is very performance driven. It is so your value is based off of what you do, how you perform. So we get it good. We really do. It's like these are the waters that we're swimming in and we don't even know that we're wet, which is why the gospel is such a radical Jesus coming and washing his disciples' feet, my goodness, that is radical. That is radical. Jesus coming not to be served as the God of, it should blow our minds that the God of the universe, who deserves all of our worship, all of our praise, all of our service, he has a servant's heart.
yeah.
And so, again, going back to Jesus is the paramount. He is the man. He is the godly, healthy, mature man. You could see Jesus in the warrior. You can see him in the lover. You can see him in the worker. You can see him in the monk. You can see him in the sage. Like, it all comes back to Jesus. And so, yes, we live in a culture where we very much even see the sacrificial service of Jesus. And because of our skewed ideas of masculinity, we can say that feels effeminate.
Yes.
Jesus feels like a weakling.
I think it's programmed into our brains because even when you're talking about the sunset, there's a part of me that was like, sensuality and manhood, never put that. Sex and manhood, yes.
Yep.
But we are taught not to put that together.
That's right. Right. But I mean, in all of this, as I think about it, it's like this is not my phrase. There is a modern malaise to men. There's this dull, like life is in black and white. Men are listless. They're purposeless. And when I think of all these categories of moving from this immaturity to this maturity, it's like, oh, that's life in color.
Yes.
Like that is life as a man where your heart is fully alive and awake to not just the joys and the pleasures and the strength, but also to the vulnerability and the brokenness of our world. And so there is really this sense of learning to be a man is learning how to be both strong and weak. It's learning how not to have these kind of compartments that we make, but how can we bring it all together?
What would you say to the dad who's listening to this going, exactly what you said, nobody taught me how to be a man. How am I supposed to teach my son? This feels like a tall order.
Yeah. Not to be self-serving, but I'd say purchase ManSchool.
It's for the dad as much as the son, you're saying,
this.
Though.
Yes, absolutely. And I even talk about in the kind of onboarding material, like, you don't have to be a perfect dad. You just need to be a present dad. The problem with so many dads is they want to be present, but they don't know how. And so I've really designed ManSchool to be like designed for busy dads who have a lot going on of like, okay, here are short 2-minute coaching videos. Here's short pieces of information that just gives you the information to get into that connection with your son. And so you don't have to be a perfect, mature man, really. And your son doesn't need you to be a perfect, mature man.
That's what I was going to say.
He needs to see and hear you say, I'm still growing in this. Because again, it's not that, okay, here are the 5 archetypes and I've walked my son through all 5 of them and now he is a perfect warrior, lover, worker, monk, and sage. No, what the dad is doing is he's saying, I am initiating this aspect of your manhood and you will continue to grow and mature into this over the rest of your life.
Yes, takes the pressure off a little.
Yes, in the same way that I am. Now, all that to say, and there's even I have some coaching videos on this. We have to acknowledge that for dads, they are going to have triggers. They are going to have areas where they're like, oh my goodness, this is really painful for me to start walking my son through. And so with that being said, just recognize we're not meant to live alone. And a dad might need to reach out to his church community. He might need to get a counselor or a spiritual director. He might need to actually take some proactive steps in saying, as I'm working with my son in this, it's stirring this up in me. And I'm trying to figure out how to navigate it as well.
Could you maybe give some words to a dad who feels like a lot for, and he's thinking, I would like to emotionally connect with my kids. I don't even know how to begin. Maybe his fear would be if I start down this road, I can't live up to it myself. I'm going to be watching these videos and my son's going to be going, that's not you. You're totally disengaged, or you know what I mean? What is language he could use to begin the conversation with his son, like, or even his daughter, just to, if he wants to reconnect, give him words.
So what I would say to that dad is, that's real. You're not alone. I would also say that you are not so far gone that you can't start. So I really have designed ManSchool with all of that in mind to say, hey, starting this thing is going to be the hardest obstacle to overcome. But once you get into it, it'll start to take on a life of its own. Like, you'll get into the rhythm. Like, you'll get exactly the coaching you need, exactly when you need it, so that you can just take that next step. And so, how does a dad begin to reconnect when he's been emotionally disconnected? It's scary, but the first step is to actually start to reconnect with yourself. If you are unable to connect with your own emotional interior life, then you will be unable to hold your child's. I mean, think about it. What are the places where our children trigger us where our children get us kind of like revved up the most. It is the places where they start showing typically emotions. It's the emotions, the places that we are uncomfortable with in ourselves. So when our child starts getting anxious, and we're like, no, you need to stop it. Like when we shut them down, we are shutting them down because we're uncomfortable feeling their emotion. Why? Because we're uncomfortable feeling that emotion in ourselves. So where do you start? Well, you just start by slowly allowing yourself to feel, slowly allowing your heart to wake up. And with that being said, I mean, there is just absolutely a dynamic of that can feel overwhelming, but we had this myth in our therapeutic culture that when we start to feel those things, we're going to fall into an abyss that we can never climb out of. I talk with guys all the time about this.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, they're like, I know I have losses. I know I have grief. I know I need to mourn the sorrows of my life. But I am so concerned that when I touch it, it's going to suck me in, and I don't have a month to sit around and be completely 100%.
Abolished. Male and female.
Yes.
Women say the same thing.
Yes. So that is a real sentiment, and I just want to say that's a myth. We have this myth in our therapeutic culture that I have to feel something 100% in order to digest it or to heal from it. And relational neuroscience says that is actually not the case. You can dip your toe into an emotion, and you are actually starting to digest that sorrow, that grief, that anxiety, whatever the challenging emotion is that you don't want to go near. All you have to do is just start to feel it. And if it starts to become overwhelming, it's actually helpful to say, okay, I'm going to put that on my mental shelf for right now, and I'm going to go experience some joy. I'm going to go experience some peace. I'm going to compartmentalize for a moment with the promise to come back. Compartmentalization is not bad. Burying, compartmentalizing in a coffin and putting it 6 feet under the ground, that's a problem, because then you get a Night of the Living Dead type situation at some point, typically around midlife. Yeah.
So much good stuff here, Rusty. Wow. As we're wrapping up, let me just ask you, any final words you want to give to men or women who are, with Father's Day around the corner, as we think about parenting, to parents, final word of encouragement for them?
I would say what I said earlier, it is hard to be a human. And our current cultural moment is so challenging. And being a parent just feels like this whole other layer and level of difficulty. So I would really just encourage men and women that it's going to be okay. And you're going to be okay. And you don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to perfectly mourn your stuff that you have to mourn. You don't have to perfectly perform for your children. What our children need, they need parents who are learning how to be with themselves, who can then learn how to be with them.
Yes.
They need our presence. And they need us to be able to hear them and all of their vomiting of their own big emotions and thoughts and all the things that are disorienting them. And they need us to learn how not to react to them and shut that down. But in the same way that Jesus tells us in 1 Peter chapter 5, come to me, cast your cares on me, for I care for you. Our kids need to feel that. And that means us learning how to cast our cares on Jesus and let him care for us. And then that creates enough spaciousness in our souls to where we can say, yeah, vomit. Go ahead. Tell me all the things. I agree with 0% of what you're saying right now.
But I can hold space for it.
But I can hold space for that.
Because I'm at peace with myself.
Because I'm at peace with myself. And when we do that, and let's just acknowledge, that is the hardest thing about parenting.
100,000%.
So I'm not saying this is easy, but I'm saying it's an ideal and a goal to work towards. It's not one that we need to get perfect every time. But if we can get it right 50% of the time, that will transform our child's life, not just in how they relate with one another, but they're going to grow up, and for them to then as adults turn around and cast their cares on Jesus, it's going to be that much easier because they've experienced it in relationship. So I would just encourage folks, this Father's Day is hard. I get it. It's hard for me. I don't get it right much of the time, but it is a worthy endeavor to be a type of person that really does show our kids more of what Jesus is like.
So good. Thank you so much, Rusty. I really appreciate it. ManSchool is available now, right?
Yes.
And they can get it at manschool.co.
Yep, manschool.co, manschool.co.
We'll drop some info too with Steadfast Ministries, all of your work. Thank you so much, Rusty.
Thank you so much, Jeanne.
Grace After Hours is a production of Grace Church in Orlando, Florida. Grace's mission is helping people take their next steps toward Christ. Learn more at discovergrace.com. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with someone you know, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.